Welcome back to the channel, everybody. And today it's my number 19 team in my 2025 NFL Deep Dive Series, the Arizona Cardinals. Thanks for coming back. Hit the subscribe button if you're a first time here. Hit the like button. No matter how many times you've been to this channel, it helps push it out, the algorithms, to the Arizona fans, to the NFL fans that love watching this kind of content in the offseason, keep everyone occupied as we head into training camp. And I like this Arizona Cardinals team. I think there's obviously, because of their 19th ranking, there's still some stuff missing here, but I've been notoriously low on Jonathan Gannon the last couple of years, and I think his ability to create a culture of consistency has been commendable, and that's why you'll see that his ranking is much higher than it used to be on this channel in the previous 2 seasons that he's been the coach. I do like Kyler Murray. I think as a passer, his size is sort of continuously becoming a detriment to him, but I think his athletic ability, he's really able to cover that up. Marvin Harrison Jr. coming for his second year, looking to continue to build that chemistry. A solid running game with James Conner, Amari DeMarcado. They got Trey Benson there. They got Michael Carter there. They got DJ Dallas. They got a bunch of guys in that backfield to really help out with James Conner, who, during his time in Pittsburgh, you're always worried about the injuries. It hasn't really reared its ugly head yet. Here in Arizona, he's been fantastic, as good as any running back in the league. Kind of just falling under the radar, I guess, because of it being Arizona. I don't know. Maybe because Arizona hasn't made the playoffs, hasn't been super exciting, but he's been great. The offensive line is looking like they've created a lot of building blocks. There's maybe a couple of pieces they could improve on, but I think, they've got the center position figured out. They got the left tackle position figured out. They're sort of building on from there. Get to the defense side of the ball. This is Jonathan Gannon's spot. This is where he has to really step up here, because there is, in the front four in particular, that defensive line, there is a lot of questions in terms of development, in terms of some of the signings that they've made. They did bring in Josh Sweat in free agency. They did go out and draft Walter Nolan. They did take Tarius Robinson just a year prior. So they've invested a lot into it. So hopefully the fruits of that investment finally start to show themselves. The linebacker room is kind of just what it is. And then there's the cornerbacks. There's the defensive backs, the safeties. Garrett Williams, healthy season, played amazing in the slot. One of the best slot corners in the entire league. We'll get to him. They stole rookie Will Johnson from the University of Michigan in the second round. Fell out of the first round with some injury stuff. But to me, it was very Derek Stingley-esque his last year at Michigan, where he just kind of, he played well enough, but it wasn't up to this elite level. And then, because he knew he was going to the NFL, he kind of knew he didn't want to get hurt. And then now Derek Stingley signed a big contract. I expect Will Johnson to immediately step up. Defensive Rookie of the Year candidate right there. They did lose Sean Murphy-Bunting. We'll get to that, how that affects some of the depth. But then they have one of the better safety duos in the league, Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson. Really good compliments to one each other. Very well-rounded in their games. And I think that's going to really benefit this team and this defense and help bring up this defense that is really going to be built and reliant on how well that secondary plays to allow the development and to allow that front four to fully come forward. But at the end of the day, the coaching staff is the thing that has been showing gradual growth as much as anything with this Arizona team. We'll start with the head coach. An 82 grade, 18th ranked head coach for Jonathan Gannon. Just the last 2 years, he was like a bottom 3 head coach for me. I just didn't get the warm and fuzzies from him, I guess, for the lack of a better term. Because he wasn't this particularly fantastic defensive mind. The team, they were scrappy when he came and took over, but it was kind of just a meh experience from my perspective. I know Cardinals fans really loved it. Cardinals fans were really supportive of him, and I think, rightfully so, because I was wrong, and he definitely took a jump up into like that. I can't say that he's like a top tier head coach yet, because the results still have to be there for the Cardinals in terms of get to the playoffs, win a playoff game, show like high levels of development. But to his credit, we saw Garrett Williams develop really well last year. He was probably the best slot corner in the entire league last year. We'll get to talking about him. He did much better with a extreme lack of talent in the front seven for the most part. Zaven Collins is still a really good player. I think he utilized him pretty well last year. I'll give him credit for that. Then you got them, keeping Budda Baker on the team, keeping him motivated and getting him back to like a level where he's one of the top safeties again in the league, sort of undisputedly. And they did a pretty good job with, not letting the younger defensive backs completely suck. Adding Will Johnson was a really ambitious move. I really like that decision. I don't know how much Nick Rallis really has in terms of his influence over the defense. He's sort of just defensive coordinator in title only because Jonathan Gannon is a defensive guy. So Rallis, I don't really give him all that much, because you want to see better development than when you have sort of the secondary defensive mind on that side of the ball. You want to see the defense up the ante a little bit more than what they did. But Drew Petzing, he gets a huge jump up for me to the 13th ranked offensive coordinator. I like this offensive staff. I think they've gradually sort of come together as well. The staff has done a good job of growing together. And that's what you really want from the Arizona Cardinals, from the organization, I'm sure from the fan bases. You were kind of down in the dumps there for a while, and now you're sort of getting back to where you need to be. Now Petzing, he's developed a pretty good running game. The offensive line, I think, certainly overachieves. He got really the best out of Jonah Williams that we've seen in a long time. You're hoping that this offensive line can just stay healthy because he does have some really good pieces on there to work with. And between James Conner, and a really stacked backfield, he's really got a really healthy run game back there, not forcing Kyler Murray to do a lot of running, even though Kyler Murray, as a designed quarterback runner, does give this offense a boost that we'll get to as well. Now, the real test for Petzing is how he's going to create at that wide receiver 2 position, because wide receiver 1 is pretty much established here with Marvin Harrison Jr., who, because of how great Malik Neighbors was last year and how great Brian Thomas Jr. was last year, he kind of fell under the radar, but he was never going to be that type of a player, that was going to wow you in the ways that those two players did. He's not going to be the super fast guy and everything, but he was used, I think, incredibly well, and we'll get to more on him coming up. But it's that wide receiver 2 spot, because they've established Trey McBride. They're establishing Marvin Harrison Jr. here for the second year. Is it Michael Wilson? They got a couple of other bodies out there that they've sort of been this revolving door at these other receiver roles on this team. So being able to nail down and establish an extension of the passing game to further the offense and to expand the offense much better, that's going to be Drew Petzing's real test here. And I think that if he can do that, if this offense really thrives and they're like a top 10 offense this year, and you see a development of a wide receiver 2, I would look for Drew Petzing to be like a sneaky head coaching candidate going into next year, because they'll see that growth, that upward growth that they've had since he became the offensive coordinator here. And I think teams will be really excited about adding that, because they're always sort of looking for that next great offensive mind to be a head coach. And I think Petzing being able to go into multiple different systems, showing now that he can hopefully control the system by himself consistently rather than being under the thumb of an offensive-minded head coach. I think we're going to see him enter into that conversation, because when you really look at it, there's not a lot of these. There's no like Ben Johnson coming out this year. He sort of was like the crown jewel of like head coaching candidates amongst the coordinators. I don't really know that there really is that guy, that strong figure in there. Maybe you can get up into some of the more truly overly dynamic offenses that we're going to cover later on. But I think Petzing is sort of the sneaky guy that a team is going to take a chance on, that maybe feels like they got a lot of the pieces in place and just need to change the messaging up to a degree, maybe change the system up a little bit. I think Petzing can really take advantage of that, but it really is dependent on what he does this year with this roster, because it really is setting him up to perfectly, really, to take that leap. And I won't be shocked if he's a head coach next year, if this team performs well on the offense side of the ball, of course. Jonathan Gannon, going back to him, if we start to see this defense continuously grow and keep coming together, I would watch for him. I've been tempted to put, maybe like $5-10 on Jonathan Gannon being the coach of the year this year. Because if they can get to the playoffs, they win 10 games and none of the top teams are really just super, super dominant. Why wouldn't Jonathan Gannon get it? He could sneak up into that area there and steal that award. So if you're a betting person, that's sort of one that I would look into investing in, certainly. Before we get into the player evaluations, we're going to jump in here with an ad break that doesn't actually exist because I don't have sponsors yet. But apparently YouTube is sending my stuff out to sponsor potential people. And the best way to help those sponsor potential people pick me, and all my hard work is for you guys to hit the thumbs up and to subscribe. Those are the two main things you can do. Helps the subscriptions to get me monetization, and the likes push it out in the algorithms that YouTube know that you guys are enjoying it, and that maybe other people will enjoy it too, and I appreciate that. Now let's get into those player evaluations. So here's Kyler Murray. He gets an 84 grade for me. That's tied for 18th, 19th, 20th-ish passing. Just passing. I think as an overall quarterback, he's certainly in that top 12 conversation, but that's his rushing ability that we'll get to later that I think elevates him into that. He sort of falls in. We've covered a lot of these quarterbacks in the last couple of videos. It's the little quarterback who, has to deal with, having more precise passing lanes and not so much having to deal with, not being able to deal so much with these bigger linemen in his face all the time, collapsing interior pockets and all that. Because when he's kept clean, he's an A+. He has a great play action game because the running game is so good. He has a really good fake. Against the blitz, he's able to identify it, but he doesn't really thrive against it all that much for what we just said, because his size does work against him in those scenarios. And that's why under pressure as well, he's just, he doesn't perform at these high levels under pressure either. And it's because he's spending a lot of time trying to scramble and get outside the pockets, and you get a disciplined edge rush group that can set an edge there and you collapse from the interior. That's where he's really going to struggle. The deep ball and the short game wasn't nearly as good as the intermediate game was last year, which is sort of a departure from what we've seen with these smaller statured quarterbacks. He also is not afraid to take those big time throws, 27 of them, but I think he can be a little over aggressive sometimes, which is why he put the ball in harm's way 16 times with 16 turnover worthy plays. He's had this revolving door of, a lot of question marks, with the head coaches and the coordinators and the receiving group. And the hope is that he can sort of get back to what he was a couple of years ago, where he was looking like he was going to be in that top 10 conversation for quarterbacks. Now that he's got Marvin Harrison Jr., now that Trey McBride has come along and he's established himself as like this top tight end. So he's got these guys at all these different levels of the field that he can go and he can work with, and developing that relationship with a blue chip talent like Marvin Harrison Jr., that can lead to 10 years of prosperity, because, quarterbacks can play a long time. I don't particularly look at Kyler Murray and worry so much about him not having longevity. I think he's got enough talent and he's got enough talent as a passer that he can sort of overcome maybe some physical issues here. He just needs to have the bodies around him. He needs the consistency. Now we go back to the coaching situation. That consistency could possibly go right out the window with the departure of Drew Petzing, but you hope that he can maintain at least some semblance of consistency on the offensive side of the ball. That's really going to help him develop further and have that second stage of development that you see quarterbacks have when they get to that next level. He sort of has petered out a little bit at that level, which is why it's hard for me to rank him, as other quarterbacks in the league have come in and developed a little bit better and are just a little bit better as passers and a little bit more reliable, and they don't have the size working against them. I do like that they have Jacoby Brissett there as his backup. I think Brissett can provide a lot. I think he's been in so many different systems with so many great quarterbacks in front of him, so many great coordinators and head coaches, that he can sort of take that Brian Hoyer role that we saw for so long, and I think he can really establish himself behind Kyler Murray here. Murray, the uniqueness about Murray is that when he does have the time, he is as clinical as any quarterback ever. I think he does have a bit of a bad habit of feeling like he needs to escape clean pockets earlier than he has to. And I think a lot of that has to do with the lack of passing lanes that he might have there that he doesn't really trust. He doesn't want to get the balls batted down, trying to throw it over the head of a defender. Those arcs into the intermediate and short levels to get over a defender and not throw it over the head of your receiver, that's difficult to do. It's very difficult to do. And I think that's why you'll see him sail it over a guy's head in those areas if he feels like the pocket's sort of collapsing on top of him. But he counteracts that by getting out of there, and he's got all the athleticism in the world to escape. I think that sometimes, though, he'll let his eyes drop a little bit when he's doing those scramblings, and it does cost them sometimes where if he just maybe maintained a more of a level of composure, that situation wouldn't occur for him. I think I say all this and I go, it makes it seem like he's a replaceable quarterback. Now, I would have understood if a couple of years ago they did replace him, like when there was the Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson draft. I feel like that was the time if they were going to move on from him, and they didn't. They invested in him, actually. And I think that if they continue on the path that they're going on when it comes to personnel and player development, and with an improving defense as well, you're going to put him in a lot better positions, and that investment, I think, is going to inevitably pay off. I don't know that he's ever going to be, a true top 10 passer, but I do think that he can regain some of the confidence that you saw early on in his career where he was doing a lot more action, a lot less overthinking in times, and I think that comes with an offensive line development as well. So we got to look for those features in Kyler Murray this season. But he ain't going anywhere. Unlike a lot of quarterbacks that might fall into this range and this grading that, they could be on their way out maybe. I don't see it with him. He's here to stay, and I think that they have a lot of faith in him, and I think that's going to take him to a second level. I would bet more that he's going to get that second boost in development and progress in his game than if he were just to continue to plateau out the way that he has the last couple of seasons. He does have the 22nd ranked weapons group here, and it is like I was talking about with Petzing in the coaching spot. Who's the wide receiver 2 here? Who's the guy that you're going, this is going to be the comment? They invested in Michael Wilson, hoping that eventually it would be him. He was sort of put in this weird situation where maybe the expectation was he'd be wide receiver 1. Then when they go out and they get Marvin Harrison Jr., that sort of put him back in a spot where I think he's much more comfortable and suitable. It'll never be Greg Dortch. It just won't. He's not the archetype for a true wide receiver 2. He's your gadget guy. He's your quick screen guy. He's, reverses, all that fancy schmancy stuff, where you manufacture touches for him because he's dynamic. But I think it would be more likely to be Zay Jones or Simi Fehoko or someone like that who would step into that role if it's not Michael Wilson, more so than Greg Dortch, just based on the skill sets and how the offenses are going to be designed around him. Because Dortch isn't going to go out and do the things that Wilson and Zay Jones and stuff would do. He's certainly not going to go out there and do the things that Marvin Harrison Jr. would do. He comes in with an 87 grade for me, which amongst the top 3 wide receivers from the last draft is 3rd. But that's because it was always going to be this way for him. I sort of touched on it a little bit earlier. He had 62 catches, 885 yards, 8 touchdowns. He had 114 targets. He only had 1 drop. He hovered just about, 42% in contested catches. You hope he can improve on that. And he spent 3/4 of his time out wide. That's where he's going to live. The thing about Marvin Harrison Jr., to me, is that he's very much like what we had in Amari Cooper, for example, or like a Jerry Jeudy, where he's this clinical wide receiver. He's not this blow-away speed guy like Tyreek Hill. He'll make great catches for you. He's very incredibly sure-handed, But his thing is that he's going to go out there and he's going to create separation with technique and good feet. And he's a perfect example of a second generation wide receiver. His dad was fantastic. He sort of is almost very, very similar in skill set to what his dad was when he played for the Indianapolis Colts all those years ago, where he ran really great routes. He was incredibly sure-handed. He just wasn't the guy that was going to go out there and burn you. He could run great deep routes like we saw with Harrison Jr. all last year. But, a lot of what you're going to want to see in his game is going to be in that 8 to 12 yard area where he's going to go out there. He's going to run a great out route. He's going to run a great slant. He's going to run a great double move. A good post corner route, all that. And he's going to, and no matter where you put it, as long as he can get his fingers on it, he's going to catch it. And he's going to make very athletic plays. But he also has a skill set that provides longevity to his career. Like we just covered Tyreek Hill in the last video. His skill set doesn't lend itself to a longevity because the first thing that's going to go is how fast you are and how shifty you are. The knees don't last forever. But having the sure hands, and we saw it with a previous Arizona Cardinals player, Arizona Cardinals legend, Larry Fitzgerald. Larry Fitzgerald was able to play forever because his skill set was completely transferable. Now, you saw Fitzgerald go out there and make extremely athletic plays. You saw him run really fast. Now, Fitzgerald is overall a better athlete than Harrison Jr. is, but I wouldn't necessarily say it by much. I think Harrison athletically can do a lot of the things that Fitzgerald was doing during his career as well. And I think Harrison Jr., it's more just giving it time to develop. He was always going to be a faster, booming player than a Malik Neighbors would or a Brian Thomas Jr. would. Just because Brian Thomas Jr. is this big, deep threat, he's going to make big plays. Malik Neighbors is this like super athlete who's going to make all these ridiculous body contortion plays the way that he did. And that's going to be what's going to make him shine. The problem with those two guys, and I'm a Giants fan, I covered this in a previous video with Malik Neighbors, is those are depreciating skill sets where if you don't develop the better, higher fundamentals, then it does kill the longevity. And Marvin Harrison Jr. he has great athleticism, but he's so strong foundationally that he was never going to fail as a player. He's never going to be a bust. He's never going to be a player who's worse than what you saw here in his rookie year with 62 catches, 885 yards. That's as low, I think, as he's ever going to get. I think from this point forward, for the next 7-8 years at least, he's just too talented to not be that like 85 catches minimum, 1,100 yards minimum player with 8 to 12 touchdowns. And I think as they get more confidence, as he gets in the film room a lot more, you're going to see him continue to rise to the occasion here. Again, the only issue that he's going to come across is just the lack of a complement. So it is going to allow teams on the outside to focus a lot more on him than they would be able to otherwise if there was a well-established wide receiver 2 here. Now, we can talk about Trey McBride being sort of a saving grace here. He's one of like the top 3 tight ends in the league. He had over 100 catches last year, 1,100 yards, only got to the end zone twice. And he played a majority of his snaps as a traditional slot receiver. Still got 40% as a traditional tight end, but for him to be able to split out in the slot, it really opened up the game for him. He actually surprisingly did well on a couple of like tight end screen plays. But like Marvin Harrison Jr., a very low drop percentage rate. He did really well in contested catches, 102.8 passer rating when targeted. The short and intermediate areas he really operated in. So they have 2 guys who, inside the hashes and outside the hashes can really work those short to intermediate areas really, really well with great route running, sure hands, and athleticism. He hopefully puts so much of a target on his back that does open things up for Marvin Harrison Jr. I think you need to start sort of designing an offense around like levels concepts where you have McBride at sort of like that short to intermediate, then you have Harrison at that intermediate to deep, and you force these these teams to make a decision on these guys. And I think if you do that, you'll also open up opportunities for other guys because you're sort of condensing the defense into these certain areas of the field and just separating them in terms of depth rather than width. And I think because of that, you cramp everyone in. It's going to open up more opportunities, and it'll open up opportunities for Trey McBride to work those double moves. Like the what is it called? The out to the post, or right up the seams. Double moves to the seam route. That's going to open up opportunities for him as well. Like whip routes and all that. Because the defense is going to get so condensed, and if you get Trey McBride out in space, he's as athletic. That's a tongue twister. I wasn't really expecting that. As anyone, like think about Travis Kelce in his prime, George Kittle in his prime, that kind of thing. Trey McBride is now that guy. He sits in that hovering area where he's a true dynamic offensive weapon who can do it all. And you get him out in space, he'll outrun your defensive backs. And if he can't outrun them, he's got all this size that he's going to start running them over. And they really found a nice little area on how to work him this past season. I can see that continuing moving forward. They got some interesting little depth pieces at tight end too to run some decent 12 personnel, like with Tip Ryman, for example. I could see running a little 12 personnel with James Conner, who's a pretty good receiving back. They don't really have that aspect at like a high level, but James Conner, he's as serviceable as you really want them to be. I'm still much more concerned with what we're seeing from wide receiver 2, 3, and 4. Somebody in there needs to break out for this offense to get to that dynamic level that it has the potential to get to when you have a McBride, a Harrison Jr., and a Kyler Murray. And they have a run game that is 4th to 5th in the league. So tied for 4th, led by James Conner. We'll talk about Kyler Murray for a second. He's 7th in the league in terms of quarterbacks running ability for designed runs. He's got that little, Sonic the Hedgehog leg movements where he almost looks like a toddler running really fast in the park. It's amazing. It's hilarious to see, but he's a great athlete. But this is really led by James Conner, who, when he's healthy, which he spent a lot of time healthy in Arizona, more so than I think a lot of people expected, he's been an absolute beast. Now, he had 232 carries last year. Most of them were gap runs, just short of 1,100 yards. 68 missed tackles forced. He did have 4 fumbles, which you want to see him clean that up. He did have a drop-off in play. He didn't get as much as he did the previous year when he had like 20 touchdowns or whatever it was that he had with the Cardinals, but he's great at hitting the hole hard. He can run over linebackers, and he's also got this thing to him where the linebackers have to hesitate. They can't really overcommit, and he's so quick with making decisions in terms of whether or not he's going to evade or if he's going to run a guy over. And he does a really good job of figuring out how the linebackers, when he gets to that second level, how they've established their feet. Because if they're kind of flat-footed, he's just going to go around them. And if they sort of invest into him, it's a really great thing to see. And it's just such a shame that his career has sort of been derailed so often going back to his time in Pittsburgh because of the injuries and just inability to stay healthy. But the way that he plays the game also has a significant impact on that. I think you see that with the level of physicality. He even has Connor Strong tattooed on his bicep. So him not being afraid of contact is a huge asset. It does hurt them in the long run, but they've done a good job of putting together some depth behind him. Amari DeMarcado has sort of flown under the radar as a really good spell for James Conner the last 2 seasons. I really like what he brings. I think he can get involved a lot more in all aspects of the game. They also brought in Michael Carter. I think it was a year or 2 ago. He was like the Jets running back who had a little bit of a nice little stint there with the Jets at the beginning, and then sort of just fell out of favor when they started to invest in more high-end running backs. Trey Benson was widely considered to be the best running back in his draft class by a lot of people, and sort of fell into here. Hasn't really done a whole lot. I think you'll see him maybe get a little bit more involved because they will want to preserve James Conner. Then DJ Dallas, I think you're going to see him be sort of the him and DeMarcado in particular. I think you're going to see them a lot more so on passing downs when they're giving James Conner a break in passing situations, more so than in straight up running situations. I think that's when you'll see Trey Benson come in. I think when Conner almost inevitably goes down, it'll be, I think, Trey Benson that sort of takes up that mantle as the early down, wear him out running back role. I also think that there's going to be a lot more, potentially, at least I hope so, a lot more like true read options, veers type of a thing, to get Kyler Murray sort of outside the pocket, get him out in space so he can execute with more confidence, so to speak. Like we talked about with the throwing, with the passing aspect, get him out into space and give him the true run pass option of the quarterback, where he's either going to take off and run or he's going to throw the ball down the field. And I think adding that true threat in there to opposing defenses is going to give a lot of headaches to defensive coordinators throughout the season. But again, it's a matter of this group staying healthy and them finding a nice little balance here with the depth they have, because it would be a real shame for them to put this much investment into getting depth on the team through free agency and the draft, developing guys throughout camp and throughout the season, and then just not using them. And then James Conner ends up, the wheels fall off of him early in the season or at a very important time in the year, and then you're kind of stuck. So you want to get some tread on the tires of some of these guys, so in that way you're sort of built for the long haul to truly maximize what this running game could bring you. Now we're taking a look at the offensive line and pass blocking. They're all just about in the middle, 17th-ish, 18th. Run blocking, same thing, they're 14th. It's a balanced group, that has some openings for competition for sure. Paris Johnson establishing himself here as the left tackle, Jonah Williams at the right tackle spot. We'll start with Paris Johnson, who had 515 snaps last year, gave up 4 sacks. So you're hoping that you see some type of improvement from him in that sense. He had 23 pressures, 17 hurries, took 7 penalties. And then, in terms of his ability in the run game, he was sort of the same. In zone, he was an A, but they ran mostly gap. And that just wasn't where he performed well at all. So I think from a 30% perspective, playing a zone, that could maybe be a good little adjustment they make, but they don't want to take away from James Conner either, because James Conner is such a great gap runner that it could create a problem where you now have depreciated the run game. So maybe just figuring out a way to develop Paris Johnson into a better gap runner could be more beneficial in the long run. The 2 guards are a little bit of I don't want to say too much of a question mark, because I think Evan Brown is a really great pass blocking guard. But he doesn't really bring you a whole lot in terms of the run game. I think Isaiah Adams is sort of a lower end starter, which, I wonder where the competition could possibly come in for Isaiah Adams, where you get a Kelvin Beachum. Can he kick into guard? Can Jonah Williams kick into guard? You are well established with your center, Hajalti Froholt, who I think came over with Petzing from Cleveland. I don't know if he got there early, but he really did great in the run game as a gap run blocker. 420 snaps, got an A- grade for me on 64% gap snaps. Sort of the opposite of what you saw with Paris Johnson, which is why Froholt gets the grade that he does, because this is very much a gap running offense at this point, where they're executing with James Conner. And, I think you want to maybe bring in guys who complement that maybe a little bit more, but I think the one thing I've noticed in the modern NFL is that you kind of lose maybe some ability in pass blocking when you have more guys that thrive in gap run blocking. I don't know if that's just something that I feel from just early season assessments and whatnot, but I don't know. You guys tell me. No one really comes to mind that I go, this person's a great pass blocker and has really thrived in a gap run game, at least in the last couple of years. I could be wrong. I'll watch it be Lane Johnson or something stupid like that. But, Evan Brown, Isaiah Adams is the one whose role is really in question here, but he's been set up to be the guy to eventually take over here and succeed. Nick Leverett is there. Don't really like him. John Gaines is kind of like a center more so than anything else. Christian Jones, I really liked him coming out of Texas, but I think Jonah Williams playing as well as he did kind of booted Christian Jones from having really any hope of being a starter here. Maybe Kelvin Beachum goes there and they can kick Jonah Williams into guard, and I don't know how much that changes a whole lot. I mean, they would definitely lose out in the run blocking. They would gain, I think, somewhat significantly in the pass game, but I think this offensive line across the board, it's a really balanced group of the starters. And you have Jonah Williams, who last year he only had 221 snaps, but he gave up 0 sacks. 7 pressures, he gave up 0 sacks. No penalties. It's only 221 snaps, though. So he kind of was looking like he was getting back to it, but if he played a full season, do those numbers sustain themselves? I don't know that they do. He's always sort of been this budding talent who hasn't really excelled into that top echelon in which he was expected when he was drafted by the Bengals. And he sort of bounced around from left tackle to right guard to left tackle again, and to left guard and to right tackle again. You hope that he can settle in and just be healthy for once. And I think he can be healthy if he produces at the level that we saw from him. It's sort of like what we saw with James Daniels last year with the Steelers at guard. It's like he was having such a positive. It was so positive. He was doing so well, and then it just kind of ended on, the tragedy of injuries and Jonah Williams just not consistently staying on the field. He has such a history of that as well, and that's why it's so hard to expect him to be anything other than like a low-end starting caliber contributor to this team, where if he doesn't stay healthy, Kelvin Beachum steps in. Maybe you get a little bit better in the passing game by like barely, but you lose out in the run game. So it is a net negative for me if that ends up happening. So you just hope that Jonah Williams can stay healthy and that he can get to where he needs to be. Because even if he can play a full season, I think you get significantly more benefits than a 75 and 72 grade that I have here. But overall, it's my 11th ranked offense. 20th in pass offense, but 4th in the run game. And again, the pass offense is really just dragged down by the lack of a more complete weapons room. And I think if you can get a great performance out of Michael Wilson, like a true wide receiver 2 performance out of him this year, then there's no reason why this can't be a top 10 offense in the league and get the passing offense to around 15th in the league. I think the offensive line does also kind of limit you a bit. I think Kyler Murray's, physical traits does kind of limit you to a degree as well. But again, there's no reason why this team can't be a top 10 offense with just a little bit of development in some of the lower end guys that are getting a lot of playing time this year. Now let's go to the defensive side of the ball, which is a tale of like multiple issues, and the biggest question mark, the thing that could drive this defense into absolute insanity of goodness, if that's even a term, is the defensive line. And it starts with the edge room. The pass rush is dead last for me coming into this. It's a group that needs a lot of help. They're 20th in run defense. It's not like they've been short of investing in guys. They just signed Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles, who I think is a good number 2 for the entirety of the season. I don't know that he's a number 1 guy. 11 sacks. He's 26th in win percentage, 47 quarterback hurries last year. He took 812 snaps. Had a batted ball, 9 quarterback hits, 67 pressure. But again, I feel like he did that in a really deep Eagles room where they had a really great interior pass rush that forced teams to sort of have to try and play a lot safer. A lot of their extra blockers were invested on the interior, which allowed him to get some free reign a lot more than maybe he otherwise would. I think you're going to see a lot more of him getting true edge number 1 treatment from opposing teams this year, and I think that could potentially cause a dip in his play and make him a little bit overpaid, kind of like what we saw Bryce Huff last year. again, not to say that I don't think he's a good signing, because I think that he is a good signing. When you're a team that is in this much dire need of improvement, he's the second best guy you got now in terms of being a pass rusher off the edge. So, and he brings a really good foundation for run defense as well. He was 23rd in stops percentage last year. He had 8.9% missed tackle rate, which I think is fine for an edge guy. He's sort of tearing off the end there, just trying to make a big play happen. So you're going to see maybe a little bit more of a whiff every now and then. But I think he was pretty solid at that role as well. And I think that's what makes him a true 3-down guy for this team. You just wish that talent had a little bit more higher end and higher upside to it that would allow them to take a step into being like a true pass rush threat. Because right now he just isn't enough to get them to raise up and to add to that. I think Baron Browning is going to be your situational pass rusher when you bump Zaven Collins back to play more of a linebacker role. But I think, between the three of these guys, you get a decent looking pass rush, and Zaven Collins really great in the run, so you'll see him and Josh Sweat in those early downs, and then Baron Browning will come in. You'll probably see a combination of the three of them working it. They drafted Jordan Birch. They have B.J. Ojulari just sort of sitting there, and you're kind of hoping, okay, maybe B.J. Ojulari, with a healthy season, he can be who they thought he was going to be when they took him in the second round, but they've sort of kept adding guys and putting guys in different positions that have sort of maybe lent to them not believing all the way in B.J. Ojulari. You can't forget about Darius Robinson, who's sort of this oversized, like 3-4 defensive end type who can maybe play some edge in some bigger sets, but you don't really know what you got in him. Sort of the same argument with B.J. Ojulari. Darius Robinson just didn't get enough playing time in his rookie year. You want him to be able to get himself on the field and get him developed. But then the problem with Darius Robinson is that they kind of drafted a guy who does the exact same things that he's expected to do in Walter Nolan in the first round this year. Now, if the idea is that you run a traditional 3-4 front with Nolan, Robinson, and Dalvin Tomlinson there, because Nolan, he does have some work to do in terms of his pass rush ability. That's not really what he's coming in and doing for you early on. He was 36th in pass rush win percentage among interior defensive linemen in college last year. He had 6 sacks, but he played mostly B-gap, played some over the tackle stuff. So he kind of does the same things that Darius Robinson's going to be doing for you, which is a little bit of a shame. But in terms of being a run defender, he's coming in. He's going to be an early down guy right out the gate for you, guaranteed. He didn't miss a lot of tackles. Once he got his hands on guys, that was sort of the end. And he was 9th in stops percentage. So he was beating guys, and he was making big stops in big situations for Ole Miss. And you want to see that carry on here. Help the defense get off the field in those 3rd and short situations. You don't want teams to be able to just turn around, hand the ball off on 3rd and short and get a first down, a new set of downs, and then you're in the same situation you've been for the last couple of years where you just can't get the offense on the field to use all the true dynamicness that they have there. They have Dalvin Tomlinson, who's going to be their nose tackle. He's as solid as they come from that role. I also really like Dante Stills, sort of like this undersized run defender as well. They sort of have these weird, like a cluster of these hybrid players between Robinson and Collier and Stills and Walter Nolan. They all kind of serve the same purpose of the same roles, the same sort of body types, the same size, the same expectations, the same skill sets. And I do wonder if that's going to hurt them in the long run, because Dalvin Tomlinson can't just be on the field all game, which means who's going to fill in his role with who they have on the roster right now. And it looks like that's probably going to be Justin Jones. And I don't know that Justin Jones is the right answer to that either. So they're going to need to figure out how to maybe bring a guy in to be a true backup for Dalvin Tomlinson at the nose tackle position, because they just have a bunch of these like B-gap, 4-eye, 3-tech, 4-eye tech guys just sort of littering their interior defensive line. So I wonder how they're going to end up dealing with that moving forward. But all in all, they need to really focus, in my opinion, on getting the best pass rushers on the field. Because you can get the best pass rushers on the field, then you can sort of mix in these guys who are great run defenders, sort of later on when you really need them to finish off drives later, because you want to put them in these long situations and make them go at the secondary, which is so strong, and give those guys a chance to not just get hung out to dry all game, where they have to be running around with guys, because you'll see that when we get to that man coverage and versus zone coverage, you want to be able to play in a nice zone with this defense, and that is going to require Baron Browning and Josh Sweat and Walter Nolan to get at these quarterbacks. And you want to see Walter Nolan take that next step. You want to see even Zaven Collins, who has sort of been an off-ball linebacker. He's been an inside linebacker. He kind of plays everywhere, to settle in as a true edge player and be another option that you can then drop him into coverage. But you also want him to be able to attack the quarterback as a pass rusher, which he just hasn't quite gotten around to doing, despite being an elite level run defender. The linebackers are it's an interesting group, because Mac Wilson and Akeem Davis-Gaither are probably the two best linebackers you got. Combined, it's the 27th in coverage, 26th in the run defense. There's a world where Cody Simon plays on early downs or in true run situations. You get Davis-Gaither off the field, because Davis-Gaither, I think, only goes about 215 or something. He's really an undersized linebacker, which we saw in Cincinnati. He was never really able to get on the field consistently despite that, because he never really developed that high-end pass coverage. But Mac Wilson, who, when he's been healthy, has actually been a really good linebacker going back to when he was in New England just a couple of years ago. He's got a balance to his game. I think he's starting caliber for sure, but it's one of those situations where you kind of wish he was linebacker 2 and not linebacker 1. And he's sort of on this team where if he's going to be linebacker 1, he'll be a green dot linebacker more than he'll be, sort of a situational early down linebacker, which is kind of where his best role is suited. He was 76 in stops, so in those short situations, he wasn't really excelling all that much when given the opportunity to. 22 stops, it's fine. When he was targeted, he did a good job of keeping everything in front of him. He played a decent zone coverage, but you'd like to see it improve. He didn't really do a whole lot in terms of really shutting down anything when it was thrown his way. And I think teams did focus a lot more, because the pass rush was so weak, to be able to push the ball down the field more and sort of just out of his realm. And you bring in Akeem Davis-Gaither, who you're hoping is a little bit of an improvement in terms of the pass coverage. He's not so much, in my opinion. I think that he has a decent ability in the run game. But again, if you told me that he was a linebacker 3, I'd be a lot happier than him being linebacker 2, potentially linebacker 1, depending on what happens with Mac Wilson. So this is really a true weak spot of this front four. There's not really that much of a redeeming quality here, unless Cody Simon steps up in a big way and establish. I think he's got a real opportunity, more so than most of these rookie linebackers in the league that weren't taken very highly, to establish himself here, because you do have guys who career-wise haven't been starters. Davis-Gaither and Mac Wilson, they're not these career starting linebackers who just never really developed or anything like that. They've sort of been, Mac Wilson sort of just bounced around from team to team and hasn't really found a true established role with them, despite having some decent talent. He's had some breakout performances and then just fallen completely off the map. And then Akeem Davis-Gaither, I think, was in a situation in Cincinnati where he had every opportunity to break out, and he never really came out and established himself. He let guys like Jermaine Pratt pass him by. So, it's going to be a 3-man competition for me. I think Owen Popo could maybe step up here. V. Jones in the run game, sure. Michael Walker, he was okay in Atlanta for a little bit there, but I haven't really heard anything from him in a long time either. It feels like a long time at least. So it's a weaker linebacker room, but I think the open competition will allow them to probably by the end of the year outplay the grades that I gave them here, at least in terms of how they match up to the rest of the league at 27th and 26th. So at the end of the day, it's an overall win, hopefully. I mean, it could be an open competition. They could all suck, and that is just a nightmare on its own. But You do have Zaven Collins, who you can eventually, if you need to in a pinch, he becomes just a straight up off-ball linebacker, and then that probably raises your rankings up a couple of spots apiece. But he does take a little bit of a hit, becoming more of an off-ball linebacker. If that was the case, his grades wouldn't be what you saw for him graded out as just a majority edge player. Now here's a group that I'm actually really fond of and actually kind of excited about to a large degree. Start right now, Sean Murphy-Bunting is out for the whole season. He was on the PUP list, so he's done. So you have this group. We'll start with Garrett Williams, who is going to be your nickel slot cornerback. 759 snaps last year out of 770 snaps he played in the slot. He dominated in zone coverage. He was phenomenal. On 60 targets, he gave up 35 catches, which when you hover around that 50% completion allowed rate, that is elite level cornerback play in the NFL. Only 343 yards, 6 pass breakups. He gave up 2 touchdowns, had 2 interceptions, a 71.7 passer rating when targeted, only 1 penalty. It's hard to find better seasons than this. And the level of patience that they saw when they picked him up, knowing he was injured, knowing that, okay, you need to get him healthy and then you need to get him on the field, you need to get him comfortable, that really worked out in their favor at least last year, and hopefully they can continue to build upon that. The issue that he has is in the man coverage, where when he did play in man coverage, he was pretty friggin' terrible. So that is an issue that needs to be addressed. And you address that with the front four, because when the front four isn't getting to the quarterback and you're in man coverage, then you just got a guy running around the field with a chicken with his head cut off, and a cornerback cannot just cover for that long. So he'll never play. He's not an outside corner. We'll say that. I think you're more likely to see him bounce back and play more of like a box safety role as well at certain times, depending on what else they can work out with the other guys in this room. But man, an absolutely phenomenal season. It turned out to be a great investment so far. Surprised he didn't get a lot more praise than what he did, but I guess, playing in Arizona, you kind of fall under the radar naturally, I guess. But then you get Will Johnson, who has sort of a very similar, almost, career arc coming to the NFL that Garrett Williams had. Garrett Williams was viewed as like this first-round pick, this fringe first-round pick. Will Johnson, at this time last year, was viewed as the cornerback in this draft. Then he comes out this year, barely plays, has some injury issues that make him fall to the second round. Arizona picks him up, and I think that this is a home run, because you look at what he did. He only played 276 snaps or something like that last year, just about that. But when targeted, a 52.6 passer rating, gave up no touchdowns, allowed 16 catches on 26 targets, hovering around that elite level 50% mark, less than 200 yards. Sort of the same thing. You want him in zone coverage more than man, especially with some of these injury concerns. But if he comes into the season healthy, he could be a game breaker for the secondary, and being established as an outside corner to complement Garrett Williams playing there in the slot. I really, really love what they've done here. And for them to end up stealing him the way that they did, because believe me, this is a steal. He was, even with the injuries, I don't know that anyone had him falling out of the first round. And if they did, kudos to them. But I know a lot of people had him going top 25 at the worst. They're like, there's no way he's getting by Baltimore. That was sort of like the thing right there. But just a really fantastic player. He comes in with an 80 grade for me, and he's very aggressive too. So he does really well in the run, which, Garrett Williams, serviceable in the run game as well. It's who's going to be the other outside corner. You would have assumed it would have been Sean Murphy-Bunting. But with him gone, Max Melton, who they took in the draft last year, is this his moment to come in? I don't know, that's going to be Jalen Jones. He doesn't play well enough in the run. He's kind of just, a softer player. He's much more better suited as just a rotational guy. But Max Melton was taken specifically to maybe break out and be a starter. So 3 years worth of draft picks at the cornerback position in the second round could yield you your starting 3 corners. And Max Melton coming in, being cornerback 2 on the outside, You hope that, you give him that help over the top with a Jalen Thompson, who fantastically balanced corner, or Budda Baker, who's like a better version of Jalen Thompson and his balance with an 85 coverage grade, 82 against the run. He did give up 129.2 pass rating last year. He gave up 4 touchdowns. But he was hung out to dry a lot by what was going on in front of him. So he was kind of just stuck, having to deal with some of the deficiencies they were having outside the hashes, because Garrett Williams had that locked down as your nickel. It was a lot of the stuff that was going on outside, so you hope that Will Johnson improves that immediately. You hope Max Melton can step up, so it makes Budda Baker not being left on these islands by himself, where, he can play maybe, he plays a very balanced safety box safety role, traditional safety box safety role, where he can sort of play everywhere on the field. He's that guy that you force opposing quarterbacks to identify pre-snap every single time. And, he'll blitz. He'll be very aggressive in the run game. He's probably one of the most balanced corners in the league, and I think he does have a real argument to be like a top 5 safety in the league still at this stage in his career. And I think he showed a lot of character as well and a lot of great leadership qualities, sort of sticking through those periods of time when there was talks about him getting traded, and he's stuck in there, man, and he's a great player to have, and he really brings another layer to this secondary. They also got some interesting depth pieces here. Denzel Burke, another rookie from Ohio State. Could there be a world where the Michigan rookie and the Ohio State rookie are your 2 starting outside corners? That's a possibility as well. I would look out for him to maybe sneak by Max Melton if Melton can't get to that next level for himself. I think the loss of Sean Murphy-Bunting really opened up this competition a lot more. I like Dadrian Demerson as like a really good cornerback 3. I think Keaton Crawford is a rookie. I think you can argue that seeing him just, playing some coverage roles as a replacement level player for, a couple of snaps a game, I think you can get something positive out of him as well. But a really good cornerback room here. 13th coverage, 9th against the run. For an overall rating, they're sitting there at that top 10. I think Will Johnson has all the potential in the world, and you could be looking at one of the top 5 secondaries in the entire league by the end of the year, if all things go well in terms of Will Johnson recovering from injury, Garrett Williams, maintaining the level of play that he had, and just maintaining a level of health amongst some of these secondary players. Because if you do lose Budda Baker, then you're kind of, you take a bit of a dive in terms of your overall grade naturally. So you don't want to lose your best players. But I think an open competition for that outside cornerback 2 role with an established nickel and established outside number 1 in Will Johnson, all things, God willing, it's a really great situation to be in. Again, they are reliant though on what the front 4 in the pass rush does, because these aren't great man coverage guys. So they get stuck in man coverage. There's going to be a lot of big plays given up, I think, by this Cardinals defense, unfortunately, that these guys are probably going to get punished for more so than they should. All that to say, they're my 30th ranked defense. And the pass defense is a big issue because you just don't know what you're getting from the front 4, the front 5, front 7 to complement the back end, like I was just saying. And, it really doesn't matter how well and how talented your secondary is. If you can't get a pass rush, there's only so many coverage sacks that your back end is capable of producing in a game on a weekly basis. You're just asking for trouble in that sense. So it's really imperative that Rallis and Gannon get the pass rushing up to snuff for that beginning of the season. I do think their schedule very much favors them, and they have an 8.5 win Vegas over-under. I'm smashing the over on the Arizona Cardinals because I'm looking at their schedule and I go, I got 5 wins that I can guarantee them. 5 that I'm really confident in. And then there's a bunch of games that I feel can go either way. But they got 2 games against Seattle. No reason they shouldn't split that. 2 games against San Francisco. No reason they shouldn't potentially split that. They could split against the Rams as well. So they're in a great position where they should at least walk out with 3 divisional wins. So right now, if they get 3 divisional wins and they get New Orleans, they get Tennessee, they get Jacksonville, they get Atlanta, they catch Dallas maybe. Then you got Indianapolis on the road. You got Carolina at home. That last game against the Rams, if it's meaningless for the Rams, do you sneak that in? So I think 9 wins is a very realistic win total for this team. So if you're a betting man, the odds are actually really good on getting the over here for the Cardinals, and I like it because they could also get off to a pretty hot start. Because you see sort of how that schedule is working out. There's no reason they shouldn't start the year 4-1, potentially 5-1 going into Green Bay. Assuming, you have to go into San Francisco, which sucks. That's a loss, but home against Carolina, home against Seattle, home against Tennessee, and then at Indianapolis, where what's their quarterback situation going to look like? What's their defense going to be looking like? How much chaos is there going to be for them that early in the year? They're kind of like a tumultuous organization at this point in time. They could be hosting Green Bay 5-1, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. And then they're sort of just going in. They need to pull 4 more wins out to get to 9. Doable. They got it. I'm talking my way into it even more, I think. You guys let me know, but I think easily I'm taking them to get 9. So they are overall my 19th ranked team. They have the 18th ranked head coach. A budding just outside the top 10 offense for the time being, but the defense is what really is the concern. The front 4, I keep harping on the front 4. If Jonathan Gannon, as the 18th ranked head coach, can take the next step to get to that next tier of head coaches and develop where he's supposed to develop on this team, which is the defensive side of the ball, then there's no reason why this team shouldn't be potentially a playoff team when you also take into account what their schedule is. So I would look for Arizona to be a very, very likely 6 or 7 seed in the NFC for this season. I'm calling it now. And there you have it, my number 19 team in my 2025 NFL Deep Dive Series, the Arizona Cardinals. We're well in now into the top 20, kind of, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Subscribe and hit the thumbs up. You've made it this far after all. Help me out, push out the algorithms, and I will see you guys with the next video next time. Bye.